This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
I'm Laurah Norton, and this is One Strange Thing, the show where we search the nation's news archives for stories that can't quite be explained. If you followed One Strange Thing for a while, then you might know that we have longed to cover the creature known as Batsquatch. Because, really, the name is enough to get us excited about all the paranormal possibilities. Tragically, though, we've never found enough coverage to make up a full-length episode. But now, strangers, things have finally changed, and we can bring you a fascinating and very weird story. Now, we will be the first to say that we have covered plenty of squatches on this podcast. Really, the variety is endless. Whether we're talking skunk apes or grassmen or any variety of hairy ape-like cryptid, we've likely brought you some version. Want mossy green fur? We've got you covered. Glowing eyes? We can offer you a variety of colors. Oh, a terrible stink is what you're looking for? We've got everything from perfume to deep bayou to the essence of rotting meat. We have stories of violent squatches raging against cars and ones that kind of just, well, stand around, and even a couple that make cute little nests in the fields. There are footprints and hair and more accusations of homemade costumes and suspect home movies than we could cover in a year of episodes. But the Batsquatch, that is a creature that is truly special. And it's not even just the wings that make it so. It's also about the addition of a volcano. Now, we'll pause here to say that it's not unheard of in folklore and legend for monsters to be linked to volcanoes, and flying cryptids are certainly plentiful. But a flying Sasquatch-bat combo that is tied to volcanoes in the United States, we feel like that's a pretty specific combination of weird. And it is just our type of weird, too. So, to get to Batsquatch, we have to start in Washington State, home of Mount St. Helens. As you hopefully learned in some class or other, Mount St. Helens is not just a geographical feature of the Cascade Range. It's also an active volcano, and not a demure one. Now, we are not going to get into a long history of the various volcanoes of the U.S. That is because we are not volcanologists, and also because, frankly, we do not want to. That said, there are some pretty important things that you should know about this particular one, because it is pertinent to our tale. According to the St. Helens Science Center, Mount St. Helens last erupted from 2004 until 2008. Which we think is honestly a pretty excessive amount of time. Over the course of that eruption, it, quote, built a pile of lava taller than the Empire State Building. Shockingly, though, that is not the most notable St. Helens event ever. It's not even the worst of the last 50 years. Mount St. Helens is most known for its 1980 eruption, which is considered the most devastating to ever occur in the United States. And this is the serious bit of our story, because it was a true natural disaster. According to NASA, the event began with, quote, a series of small earthquakes in mid-March, and peaked with a cataclysmic flank collapse, avalanche, and explosion on May 18th. The May 18th eruption began with an earthquake that caused the northern flank of the mountain to collapse, producing the largest landslide in recorded history. Per the USGS, quote, a pillar of ash and gas rose high into the sky, blocking the sun and turning daylight into darkness, and mud flow from the landslide swept logs, boulders, trucks, and homes downriver like toys. The result of the eruption was dozens of deaths, billions of dollars in damage, and ash that drifted across multiple states. Highways were shut down, flights were grounded, and the Columbia River rose by, quote, nearly 30 feet. The reconstruction of affected disaster areas took years. And of course, scientists around the world, they studied the effects of the eruption. According to the USGS, one of the most surprising findings was that the environment recovered much more quickly than anything man-made did. The assumption was that, quote, all life would perish when the ash, steam, and volcanic debris scorched the landscape, and that it would take a long, long time for anything to reemerge. But that was not the case. And what's even more interesting is that as nature began to repair itself, it did not just regrow, it changed. As the USGS explained, quote, over the years, a new complex mosaic of habitats emerged after the eruption. The diversity of life at Mount St. Helens today exceeds that of the pre-eruption landscape. It's an event that has been discussed at length by people who actually understand volcanoes, and as established, we are not them, so that's probably enough of a science lesson from us. But there was certainly one new appearance in the ecosystem that was not discussed by those very important researchers. One that didn't emerge after the ash cleared. In fact, according to local lore, its appearance actually coincided with the massive eruption. And yes, strangers, we mean Batsquatch. Now, there were certainly more important things surrounding Mount St. Helens to report on in May of 1980. And maybe that's why we can't actually find any reporting from the 1980s on this particular story. We can only find more recent articles that reference the events. Maybe they exist out there, but we think it's more likely that there were simply rumors. Perhaps they started exactly at the time of the eruption, or maybe the stories were passed around later. We, of course, can't say for sure, but we can tell you what was reported later on. In a retrospective piece, the Pacific Sentinel wrote that back in 1980, the sky was still full of ash when people began to report, to whom we don't know, that, quote, a winged beast was seen flying around the eruption site. And not just any winged beast, like, say, a bird of prey who'd lost its home. No, apparently the unnamed witnesses were pretty dang sure that they'd spotted a creature soaring through the sky that had a very specific and very un-bird-like feature, an ape-like body. Not only that, but its wings were, quote, large and leathery, so more like a bat's, and the beast had, quote, glowing red eyes. None of the modern sources offer more detail than that. Not that it's a minor happening to see a flying, laser-eyed, ape-like bat when you're dealing with the fallout of a volcano, but this is about all that we could dredge up. And maybe those stories would have drifted away. Mirages, seen in all that terrible ash in the sky. Except that Batsquatch returned. Eventually. And when an up-and-close, personal sighting occurred, nearly 15 years later, the incredible portmanteau Batsquatch was born. It was 1994 when the News Tribune covered a strange encounter in the Mount Rainier area. For reference, that's about 150 miles from Mount St. Helens, where the reports had come in 14 years earlier. An 18-year-old named Brian Canfield told reporters that he was driving in the foothills of the mountain when his truck suddenly stopped, all on its own, and left him alone on a dark and rural road. And that's when he saw it. Something in the sky, just in front of his vehicle. The Tribune described it as something straight out of a horror film, a creature that descended from the sky. Quote, "Then he saw the feet, descending, bird feet, claw feet, then the legs, the torso, the chest, and then the wings, folded, attached to the back of broad shoulders. Then the head, that face, the creature, 9 feet tall, 30 feet away, blue-tinted fur, yellowish eyes, tufted ears, and sharp, straight teeth." The article went to great lengths to explain that Brian was a, quote, "normal and average student, and not on drugs," which we're relieved to hear. But the point was, we think, to stress that there was no reason that he should be seeing an enormous flying gargoyle of an ape drop from the sky. And Brian, he heartily agreed with this. He should not have seen a Batsquatch. He told the Tribune that he stared in disbelief at the creature, which pretty much did the same thing in return. They had a standoff for moments or maybe even minutes. Brian was honestly unsure. But then it spread its great leathery wings. They flapped once, and then twice, and then it shot up into the air with so much force that the truck rocked. The creature gazed at him for a moment longer before, quote, "it headed in the direction of Mount Rainier." C.R. Roberts, the reporter who interviewed Brian, was struck by how shaken the encounter had left the young man. He finished the column by saying that he believed him, though C.R. Roberts' own research had turned up nothing in legend or science that could explain the encounter. Readers of the News Tribune, they were more mixed in their reactions. Some felt that he should be kept off the science beat, something that Roberts apparently occasionally covered, if he was going to report on something as ridiculous as a Batsquatch with any kind of credulity. Now, according to Oregon Live, Monsters Across America eventually decided to make a special series about Batsquatch many years later. Another reporter who'd interviewed Brian way back in 1994 was willing to talk and said that Brian had seemed to honestly believe what he'd seen. But when the producers reached out to Brian, he told the team to speak with his mother instead. His mother explained that Brian didn't like to discuss the experience. It was an unpleasant memory, and it had attracted a lot of undue attention. That's just not the behavior of someone trying to capitalize on a fantastic story, no matter how bizarre or hard to believe it might be. We have no idea what poor Brian Canfield saw back in 1994 when his truck stalled out on that lonely road. Of all the possibilities, a flying Bigfoot, it does not rank very high. Not when you're operating on pure logic, at least. But when we're looking at the big picture of portending doom, maybe, things do get a little more interesting. Because, and stay with us here, there was something else that happened in the area around the same time. Per the Fresno Bee, it was also in 1994 that scattered reports of angels at Mount Rainier began to filter in. You know, the classic kind of angels, bewinged and glowing gently with ethereal light from heaven. The Bee reported that in October of 1994, multiple angel sightings were being discussed in the community, and many thought that they were a sign that Mount Rainier was soon to erupt. Now, before you're like, okay, podcast, why would that be a thing? People do have some logic behind making that connection. According to the Fresno Bee, there's a possible biblical tie between angels and volcanoes, with some interpreting a line in Revelations as a passage where the divine messengers herald a catastrophic eruption. Now, obviously, no cryptids are mentioned, but sightings of both at the same time, it seems ominous. A Batsquatch, angels, portending doom, it does not sound great, right? It's the kind of thing that, no matter how hard to believe, people might want to pay attention to. When we're given signs, we should, perhaps, heed them. We should, except for one strange thing. Mount Rainier did not erupt in 1994. It still hasn't. If angels were bringing some warning, that delay has been extreme. So, people saw something, and doom was predicted, and then nothing happened. That is a story that we hear often enough, right? So, we can say case closed. And yet, some experts think it's only a matter of time, which is a kind of strange Uno reverse if we're looking at Batsquatches and angels as signs. According to the Smithsonian, the last true confirmed eruption of Rainier was around 1450, but there have been other possible eruptions since then. The last was around 1894. That's exactly 100 years before this whole Batsquatch angels thing went down. Does that coincidence have any significance? Well, if you listen to our premium episode on the Lincoln-Kennedy coincidence, you know what we're going to say. No, it does not. Particularly because nothing actually happened in 1994. Unless you count poor Brian Canfield having a really, really bad day. But back to Mount Rainier. The evidence of infrequent eruptions makes the volcano sound pretty safe. On the surface. Well, it would, except for that for a long time, Mount Rainier was on something called the Decades Volcano List. It was begun in the 1990s by an organization called the International Association of Volcanology and Chemistry of the Earth's Interior. According to an archived version of the United States Geological Survey's official website, the Decades List was, well, a list of volcanoes that are at serious threat of eruption. Per the World Atlas, 2 U.S. volcanoes were on that roster. There's Rainier, of course, and Mauna Loa in Hawaii. We don't think that Mount Rainier was actually ever removed from that list. Rather, it's more that the project seems dormant. We can't find any evidence that the Decades Volcano List is still being updated, unless that's happening somewhere that non-volcanologists just aren't hip to. Websites devoted to tracking that information seem to have petered out in the mid-2000s, but it is worth noting that the United States still considers Rainier to be a real threat. The predictions of eventual activity are ongoing, and they pop up in discussions of possible future volcanic eruptions in our country. Now, what all of that has to do with Batsquatch, or for that matter, angels? Honestly, we cannot say. But it's interesting that reports of the cryptid, first rumors, scattered and unattributed, and then up close and personal, came in from the 2 sites in the continental United States that have either had or threatened volcanic activity in the last 50 years. And if we circle back to what started all of this, someone seeing what they interpreted as a flying Sasquatch, then these reports have been surprisingly rare, considering its relative fame. But there are a few other Batsquatch encounters that have popped up here and there. Per Oregon Live, most or maybe all have centered around volcanoes, like an encounter reported, quote, by hikers at Mount Shasta in 2009, and a pilot whose craft may have been buzzed by Batsquatch in the air near Mount Rainier. But no other sighting has offered the details of Brian Canfield's, who said the cryptid got up close and personal with his truck, as you know, all the way back in '94. Now, in our research, we did find some anonymously reported sightings that were listed on websites designed to track cryptids, especially Bigfoot. These websites are, respectfully, usually very weird. The vibe is Angel Fire circa 2003, with the spinning eyes and the pyramids and lots of neon text on black backgrounds, the kind that makes our eyes ache. But we have to say that the stories gathered there ring with authentic emotion, if not consistent logic. If the stories are to be taken seriously, if not necessarily believed, it seems that more people have seen Batsquatch, maybe multiple Batsquatches, around volcanoes in the Pacific Northwest than have ever actually reported it to the press. As for theories as to what Batsquatch, whether there was one or many, might actually be, as we've already mentioned, they remain as hazy as the sightings themselves. If these creatures even exist, perhaps they portend eruption, like the angels might or might not have been at Mount Rainier. Maybe they're actually aliens, up to extraterrestrial shenanigans, or even scientific observation. There's actually an entire alien UFO Mount Rainier subplot that could take days for us to explain, and is really intense on the angel angle. And don't worry, the Hollow Earthers have actually also weighed in on both flying apes and angelic creatures, which they figure could be coming from, yes, the center of the Earth. So there's that. And don't forget the occasional suggestion that Batsquatch was actually an angel itself that was simply misinterpreted as a cryptid. Truly, you could stay busy for the next decade with these theories if you decided to stop having friends. Or perhaps there's nothing to the story, and maybe something else, something totally mundane and explainable, scared Brian Canfield on that night in 1994. Over the past 4 years, we've seen plenty of explanations for other such sightings. Giant owls are a popular solution. So are a mix of trees and light and animals moving quickly in the darkness, casting shadows that take on the shapes of our fears. And maybe, as we said before, displaced raptors could explain a lot of the confusion in the 1980s, if those stories ever actually even existed then at all, if they weren't retconned to create a fantastic layer over a terrible disaster. As with so many things, strangers, yes, we truly can't say for sure. And while the Batsquatch does press the limits of credulity, we have to admit that we love the concept of a flying Bigfoot with massive bat wings. It's not every day that a new cryptid gets introduced into the fold, and one that might be a harbinger of volcanic eruption. We have to appreciate the paranormal with a purpose, even if it doesn't quite hit the mark every time. Personally, we'd like to prepare as much as we can. Although, truly, we would appreciate just a little more specificity when it comes to the timelines. We hope you'll join us next time for another real-life story from the fine print of America's local papers, from the lives of regular people, just like you and me, except for One Strange Thing. One Strange Thing is an independent podcast. To support the show and to hear more of the entirely true and enticingly peculiar, you can check out our premium offerings. If you'd like to subscribe on Apple Premium, we've established a new feed where you'll get both premium and ad-free episodes. On Patreon, you'll find ad-free early releases of our regular episodes, 2 full-length bonus episodes, monthly giveaways, and blog posts, all for $5 a month. We hope you'll check out one of these options to support the show. There's a link in the show notes. And if you enjoy One Strange Thing, please take a moment to leave us a great rating or review on your favorite podcast app. It really helps. This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.